Something that I do, I find myself doing a lot, is I get into bed, I feel like I'm tired, yet I'm laying there and I'm thinking about every embarrassing thing I've ever said since middle school. And I beat myself up. I have a busy day the next day. How do you change your relationship with sleep so, you can get there faster?
Yeah. I'll share something that I find personally very helpful for me is that I have struggled with insomnia before. I am also not a good sleeper like you. And something that has really helped me is brain dumping my thoughts before going to bed. And so I have found my brain is like a problem solving machine. And if something is bouncing around in my head, I will chew over it again and again until my mind feels like I can come to some sort of a solution or a decision. And that's not always helpful at, you know, 10 or 11 p.m. when you're trying to go to bed. And so for me, getting those thoughts out of my head and onto the paper helps me feel like I've mentally put a check mark on them. I've put them somewhere, they are stored. I know I won't lose those ideas, but it's sort of a releasing technique for my mind to feel like, okay, I don't have to think about that right now. We've captured those somewhere and now it's time to sleep. So that's something I find personally very helpful.
That sounds really helpful. And you busted the bedtime routine myth, but what about that 6 to 8 hours a night? Is that super
Yeah.
rigid? Do you need 8 hours of sleep a night, or does that change person to person?
No, according to Dr. Wu, you do not need 8 hours of sleep per night. She gave the example of think about someone who is a professional athlete versus someone who's a couch potato. They don't have the same energy or recovery needs. Or someone who is a pregnant person, for example, and literally building another human. They may have a higher drive and need for rest than someone else. And our relationship with sleep and our ability to sleep also changes as we age. Most older adults have trouble sleeping longer. They may wake up more, for example. Whereas if anybody has had a teenager, they can sleep for hours and hours on end because they're growing physically, their brain is growing, they're consolidating information in their mind. And so each of us has different needs, and it's important to understand what your personal picture is, as well as that idea of your chronotype that I mentioned earlier, understanding what are your natural rhythms and what does that suggest about when you should be waking up versus when you should be going to bed.
And how do you put this in context of being a working professional? I am a night owl, but I do have pretty early hours in the morning. So what should I do?
Yeah, this is a challenge because the world is not really made for night owls. And I think you have to know yourself. So I have folks in my family who are night owls and they find that their most productive hours are, 1 to 3 a.m., for example. And so I think you have to work around what your type is. And to the extent possible, if you are someone who tends to be a night owl, can you change your schedule a little bit so that in the early mornings, maybe you don't have meetings in particular that you have to get to at a certain time. It's tough though, because like I said, the world is not necessarily made for people who are night owls.
Let's move it even a step further. You're a working professional, you're out on the road for work, on a business trip somewhere, and your environment has changed. What can you do to ensure you still have a good, restful night's sleep?
Yeah. Dr. Wu gave a great example that when she travels, she brings her eye mask everywhere. And for her, she suggested that that's a cue for her to go to bed, that, okay, just like when we're at home, it's time to go to sleep. And having that stability and that consistency, even though she's in a new environment, is really helpful. And of course, there's the practical reason of blocking out the light that may be coming through the windows. I know I have stayed in hotel rooms that are right across the street from a lot of places with neon signs shining in the window. And so be thinking about how can I provide some consistency to my bedtime routine? How can I bring pieces from home and bring that with me when I travel?
A theme you've been bringing up is consistency, listening to your body. In your conversation with Dr. Wu, who's a sleep psychologist, what other things surprised you, resonated with you, things that you're going to practice?
I think one of the other things that surprised me or that I'm certainly taking away is this idea that me time shouldn't be spent scrolling social media. I am so guilty of that, that as soon as I have a moment of open time or at the end of the day, my fingers are are gravitating right over to social media to check that. But, she was really advising that your me time should be spent doing something with your hands, catching up with a friend, doing something that nourishes you in some way. And so personally, I find that reading fiction books is a great way to take my mind off of business and career and personal matters and really dive into something else. And so I think that's a good takeaway for all of us, that your me time should truly be your time, not social media time.
I'm definitely guilty of mindless me time as well. So I will take all of these things into consideration. Melody Wilding, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.